now we're going to, as they say, go to something completely different. Stakeholder engagement. We have, where is Lisa? There. We have another travel guest from the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. Lisa, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Energiforsk for hosting. I'm pleased to be back in Sweden. I was thinking last night, as we had our dinner in this beautiful room, that the last time I was here, I was in the bunker at Forsmark NPP visiting their emergency preparedness procedure. So it was quite of a different setting this time around. So this is a word that has come up already in our discussions today, perception. And I'd like to start by asking you this question. What do you know, think, and feel about the IAEA? And there's a point to this question. So if I could ask you to just throw out some words that come to your mind when you think about the agency, what comes to mind? You don't have to raise your hand, but go ahead and yell out. I'm listening. Safety. Hans Blix, yes. Bureaucratic. Bureaucracy, okay. Global. Safeguards, yes. The watchdog, right? Anything else? Iran, helpful, thank you, that's good to hear. Pardon? Poor nuclear communication, okay.
I would say improved nuclear communication.
Improve or improved? Okay.
Over the last year or two.
Good, thanks. Is anyone else going to jump in? Okay, so it's different things, your knowledge, your thoughts, and your feelings about something. I'm going to play a short video. It's also an illustration about maybe how to communicate, how to tell something in an illustrative way about the IAEA. It's a couple minutes long, and we'll see if after this video, perhaps your perception might have changed or not.
In 1957, an agency was created with a vision to harness the power of the atom for the benefit of humankind. It works with partners across the globe to help countries use nuclear science and technology to meet development challenges. Boosting food supplies, improving health, protecting the environment, and contributing to global peace. This agency provides the technology, expertise, and training to make all this possible. Through nuclear science, it helps countries to develop high-yielding crops that can thrive in extreme conditions, breed healthier livestock, and protect fruit and animals from harmful pests. The work of this agency supports the conservation of our oceans and coastlines, protecting the marine resources that ensure the livelihoods of millions of people. It promotes the use of nuclear technology to fight cancer and improve human health. The organization assists countries with their energy planning. If they choose nuclear power, it offers expertise to ensure facilities are run safely and securely. It provides standards and assistance to ensure the safe use of radioactive materials, guidance on the management of the waste generated by the use of nuclear technologies, and helps nations to prepare for and respond to incidents and emergencies. It's an agency that prevents the spread of nuclear weapons by helping to make sure that nuclear materials remain in peaceful uses. It's the global platform for cooperation in nuclear security, advising countries how to guard against nuclear terrorism and prevent the theft and smuggling of radioactive materials. Providing technology and expertise. Promoting safety and security. Assisting sustainable development. This is Atoms for Peace and Development. This is the IAEA.
It's very dramatic. This is the IAEA. Did you learn something in this video about the IAEA? Maybe there's a little bit more we do than at what first meets the eye, right? So in my little corner of this 2,000 plus person organization, I work on supporting our member states in capacity building for stakeholder engagement. Because we're very bureaucratic, we have a tendency to not be as cutting edge with our terminology as we would like to be. So I am a stakeholder involvement officer, even though I would rather be a stakeholder engagement officer. I think there's a nuance there. But at least I'm not a stakeholder management officer, which used to be the case. So as we talk about the evolution of communication, I think we have come some way. This slide is up to show you the range of support that we provide. Typically, this support is for countries that are considering introducing their first nuclear power program. But operating countries are also benefiting from some of this support, in particular from our annual technical meetings. The training course, some member states are sending some new communicators to those courses. But I want to point out in particular the expert missions and workshops. Mic's gone out? Oh, okay. A country will come to us and request support. We never go into countries and just say, here we are, and listen to us. It's always based on request. And it could be a country, for example, that is in the planning stages of their first nuclear power program. And they say to us, we need to strengthen our strategy on how to engage with stakeholders. And so we'll come in with a team of experts from other countries and work with that country for 3 to 5 days. We're really going to dig deep into their context, into their situation, and try to provide some guidance and support that's really tailored. Based on international good practice, on methodologies, we're not doing the engagement for that country, but we're trying to be there as a support to then launch them on their way. So I've had the opportunity to go to maybe 20, 25 missions in my time at the agency. In the next couple of months, I'll be traveling 4 times to countries that are in the consideration phase and to the construction phase of their first nuclear power plants. So we're getting a lot of information from these types of missions around the world. Who are we interacting with from the agency side? We typically have 4 main counterparts. We call these the key organizations. The government, so maybe the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Environment, an EPIO. That is a nuclear energy program implementation organization. And this is a mechanism that is typically set up by a country that is considering nuclear power to look at the whole range of issues that need to be looked at for nuclear power. And I'll explain what those issues are in a second. Of course, the owner-operator or future owner-operator would be present, and the regulatory body as well. And we try to foster this discussion and engagement amongst these key organizations. The background is really busy. That's full of the different stakeholder groups that these guys are working with themselves. So we're not talking to their neighboring countries, their labor unions, their suppliers. Those are their stakeholders. But we try to support them to effectively do that. Why am I talking about countries considering nuclear power for the first time? Because I think that there's something that we can learn from how they're approaching their projects, their nuclear projects. And that's one of the questions I was asked when I was asked to come and speak here was, is there something we can learn from other countries around the world? They're looking at 19 different what we call infrastructure issues. And inherently, stakeholder involvement is cross-cutting across those 18 other issues. And they're looking at them all in extreme detail, and the IAEA is along with them each step of the way, whether they're in their consideration phase, and then at the end of that phase they could decide yes or no to pursue a nuclear power program, whether they're in their planning phase, or whether they're in their construction phase. So I'm heading out to the UAE and Belarus this year to talk about stakeholder engagement. They're the next countries to be operating their first nuclear power plants, probably in the next 12 months. So you can see how varied this is, but it's also very methodological. It's very structured. And we have experts in all different areas going to countries to assess the different issues. This is where we start with the asking questions. Yesterday there was a really interesting, I think Thomas, you mentioned assumptions in research and how important they are, and they're an important part of research. I'm here to say that it's important not to make too many assumptions when it comes to engaging stakeholders and when it comes to communication. What do people know, think, and feel about nuclear power? This is, I think, one of the first questions. We were just hearing about it in the panel. It's very easy to make assumptions. I think the question was, is there an increase in support for nuclear power around the world? I can't answer that question. I don't know. You need to do opinion research to get the answer to that. You need to have focus groups to get the answer to that. You need to be in country X, Y, or Z, in an organization, at a local community level. The public is a difficult word at the end of the day. Who is the public? That can vary as well. So avoiding those assumptions about what people know, think, and feel, I think is a really important starting point. And I'm not just talking about the public here. I'm talking about counterpart organizations, the NGOs in a country, the other industries in the country. What do they think about your projects? What do they think about your activities? And once you get that information, you can really start a dialogue. You can really start a conversation. And using this information from this research will help you better communicate and engage with stakeholders. Stakeholder engagement often is considered a synonym for public information or communication. And it's a lot more than that, and it's much more complex than that. In reality, it's really about relationship building, because once you have a good relationship, trust increases. Trust is the backbone, right? We've been hearing about the importance of trust in nuclear power programs. These are just kind of thrown up there. They came into my head as I was preparing this slide. Obviously, consultation in a formal setting will be part of stakeholder engagement. Partnerships, official partnerships as well. Kirsty's slide made me smile when she said, IRENA should merge with the IAEA. And I thought, well, not today. That's not going to happen, of course, but should we partner with IRENA? Yes, I think that would be a wonderful thing to do. Should we have a cooperation mechanism, an official one? Yes, that seems like it would be a good step to take. So these are all different ways of engaging with stakeholders. Once you're deep in this field of work, you are probably going to at some point come across the need to have a stakeholder map. A stakeholder map allows you to plot your stakeholders and inherently prioritize them. This map is intentionally empty of any stakeholder groups, because I'm not going to put myself in any hot water by saying the media is more important than the regulator or whatever. But inherently, we're looking at a level of influence and decision power and a level of interest in the project. And you may end up with some stakeholder groups that have potentially a lot of influence in your project, but at this point in time end up around here. They're not very interested in what you're doing. So you may say, oh, well, that tells me that I have some work to do to increase their interest in what I'm doing, and I will dedicate some efforts to that. Or you might have some people or some groups that are not very influential now, but may become influential in the future if, for example, they're a political party that is not in power at the moment and then gets elected. And we've seen that in some parts of the world. We've seen nuclear programs get cancelled because a new political party has come to power. I'm talking about first nuclear power programs here. So stakeholder maps are really, really important in this field of work. I'm trying to emphasize that this is much more than just communication. It's much more than just press releases, a fancy, shiny website, tweeting and retweeting all the time. It's quite a complex field in itself. So the challenges, there are more than these 5 that I have up on the screen, but I did want to highlight some of these. I think misinformation is a key challenge across the world. This is something we hear anywhere we go, is people don't necessarily understand about nuclear, about radiation, about energy. There's a country that is currently operating a lot of nuclear power in the world, and a survey last year showed that about 60% of the population thought that nuclear power was contributing to CO2 emissions. So when we have statistics like that in countries operating nuclear power, there's something to be said about levels of misinformation. So what do we do to counter those? Partisan politics. This is a big problem in a lot of countries. I was on site visits to the United States just last year in September, and I heard that on a state level in particular, that, yeah, politicians are voting along party lines, the parties against nuclear. Then if they're in power, it's a big challenge. I started with the word perception, and here I'm talking about misperceptions. That's also a big challenge, I think, for nuclear power around the world. Credibility. This is something that's built over time, right? We were talking over lunch with Marcus about who comes to our activities when we host these capacity building activities. And I mentioned, well, the regulator is typically there. But in countries that are considering nuclear power for the first time or building their first plant, the regulator is often reluctant to join these conversations because they have this idea of their independence being jeopardized if they're seen in the same room as the government and industry. And we really try to underscore, actually this is the French regulator told me this once, their tagline is, we are independent but not isolated. And that's really important. So how do you build that credibility with your stakeholders and with the public from an early stage, and how do you rebuild trust and credibility if it gets damaged along the way? And here, engagement with decision makers. We find that that is typically a very big challenge across the world, regardless of whether that's newcomer countries or countries with operating nuclear power plants. And this is in particular the case, for example, for new build. How do you engage with decision makers to expand your nuclear power program? So I started maybe with the negatives and move on to perhaps some more positive trends. And what we've seen is more openness to share information across organizations, across borders. And this is something that I've been trying to do in the past 6 months, actually. I held a small meeting at the IAEA in August. As I said, we're here and we're doing a lot of good work to support the almost 30 countries around the world that are considering their first nuclear power plant. 30 countries. It's a lot of countries. There are 30 countries operating nuclear power. And typically we bring our experts from Sweden and from France and from the US, and we turn around and we go to Jordan and to Poland and to Belarus, and we say, here's the experience from years and years of operation. But going back to that slide on challenges, I saw some people nodding here. I think that these are also challenges shared by operating programs. So I brought a small group of people to Vienna from EDF, from SKB, from Exelon, from Xcel Energy, from a few operating programs, and I kind of gave them a similar presentation, that slide with all of the capacity building support. I said, this is what we're doing. And I went into a lot of detail about what each of those activities meant. And I said, do you think that there could be value in some of this support for you? And the answer was, yes, actually. Perhaps not in the form that it exists now, because it's really quite tailored for first-timers or newcomers, as we call them. But it was really interesting to watch someone from Exelon look at someone from SKB and say, you know, what you just said or presented resonates with me. I'm facing something similar. How did you face that challenge? So on a practitioner level, making those connections and supporting people in terms of exchanging that information is really something that we're seeing more of, and that we at the IAEA are going to try to foster more moving forward from now on. Partnership building. That's at our level at the IAEA, but also within the member states. We're seeing a lot of goodwill to want to build partnerships with non-nuclear industry entities, with partners who perhaps in the past have not been the most evident. Changing the nuclear narrative. This is something also that came up in the panel. Not always talking about safety as our first line of messaging. Being proud of the contributions that nuclear power has made to society over the past decades. Trying to give the nuclear community a different light in terms of its image, so to speak. And that comes from talking differently, saying things in a different way, and getting third-party advocates to also emphasize our messages. Strengthening risk communication is something that is also a trend that we're seeing across the board. So we're not coming out and talking about safety necessarily as our first line of messages, but we certainly have that airtight messaging as a backup to those questions, because you know they're going to come about the waste. You know they're going to come. So how do you answer them after you've given our, well, these are our 3 key messages, A, B, C, then supporting that with airtight risk communication. And the importance of communication. When I started at the IAEA in 2008, I worked in the emergency center. And one of my first tasks from my boss was, Lisa, go ahead and propose a safety standard on communicating with the public in emergencies. So if anyone is familiar with how safety standards are produced at the IAEA, it's a very long, drawn-out process. They are consensus documents, which means every single member state agrees to the content of those safety standards. Anyway, long story short, I got about to the first step before someone said, why do we need a safety guide on communicating in emergencies? And it was scrapped. And I instead made what we call tech docs, which are lower level, easier to publish, don't require consensus, and they were published. And then March 11th, 2011 happened, the Fukushima accident, and everyone turned to the emergency center and said, why is there no safety standard on communicating with the public in an emergency? So we are coming a long way, because this safety guide will be published, I think, within the next year. It was immediately put back on the table. It's going to happen. And we're seeing countries pay more attention to the importance and complexity and difficulty of communication, that it's not something easy that you can just do because you're good with words, that it's also about relationships, about working at this over time. So I definitely think that that's something to emphasize. So I want to wrap up relatively quickly, but here are some of the things that came out of that meeting in August that I mentioned with our operating countries. We're going to try to put together a stakeholder involvement core team at the IAEA with representatives of different countries. So if you know someone wonderful who should be on that core team, please let me know, because this is going to be the sort of the beginning of actually building something useful, meaningful to you. That's what the IAEA is here for. We are at the service of the member states. So we don't want to just invent activities that we think you want, that we assume you might want. We're asking and we're listening. New partners, hopefully, we want to not only build partnerships ourselves, but also, again, help our member states build better partnerships. A focus on opinion and knowledge research. I get asked, probably now about once a month from a country, can you give me an example of survey questions that a member state has used in their country? And I say, well, I can't give it to you, but hey, we happen to be at a meeting, go ask that country. I know they just did a survey last year. And I've seen it happen where practitioners will hand over their information. I emphasized openness and information sharing. So trying to facilitate these levels of cooperation is something that we're going to emphasize. Networks, I think this is something that could be helpful, probably online, but maybe also in person. And information sharing platforms where maybe practitioners could upload reports, perhaps questions from their surveys if they're willing to share different elements. We'll have to discover those as we go along. And then social media, AI perhaps. Again, these were ideas that were kind of thrown on the table over a couple day meetings. So let's see where we go. Kirsty mentioned our conference. If you're not familiar with this conference, in October we held the first international conference on climate change and the role of nuclear power. If you Google Atoms for Climate, #Atoms for Climate, you can find all of the presentations and the abstracts, the speeches. You can watch those. They're all available, and I highly recommend that you do, because this was quite a turning point, having the heads of the IPCC, of IEA, those organizations standing up and talking in a positive light about the role of nuclear power in climate change mitigation. This is where you can follow us at a departmental level, and here are the Sustainable Development Goals that we are directly working towards supporting. So affordable and clean energy, of course, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and climate action. This is our Twitter feed and our direct website. I know you're going to get these slides, so you don't need to write them down immediately. And then at a broader level, at an organizational level, here are all of the ways that you can follow us. But of course, me personally, because this is where I really think that it starts, if you want to reach out to me, I'm always available. My email address can be shared, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you moving forward. Tack så mycket. Thanks.
Nice with a Swedish touch there at the end. Yeah, noticed that.
That's it.
So we're switching over to Swedish now.
Varsågod.
Oh, there you go. So one question that comes to mind from a kind of non-expert in this, at least, is this really about stakeholder engagement, or is it about stakeholder convincing about the benefits of nuclear?
That's a good question. You know, from the IAEA perspective, if a country wants to pursue nuclear power, that's their sovereign right. So we are here to help a member state do that in a safe, secure, and sustainable way. I don't like the word convincing. I don't like the words public acceptance necessarily. I think that we do need to maintain a level of respect for our audiences and our counterparts. But if you go back to the slide that I had with all the different boxes, it's about listening, it's about dialogue, it's about understanding the basis for a decision. So you may not agree with that decision, but at least you understand how that decision has been reached. And I think that is actually an underlying point about this whole area is informed decision making. So whether that's the decision makers or the public, and then them electing those decision makers, we were talking last night a little bit also about reluctant acceptance. We may not love it at the end of the day, but we realize that it's an important piece of the puzzle if, for example, climate change is something that we, you know, are particularly focused on.
So when you work, do you usually come into the phase where a government, say, they've already decided that they want to go down this route and build their first nuclear reactor, and then it's about, at least in my words, would be explaining that decision? Or do you also work with governments kind of contemplating this, thinking, should we or should we not? And how, if that's the case, do you work in different ways in those two cases?
Yep. So we have what we call the milestones approach. It's a framework for countries considering nuclear power for the first time. And we break it up into 3 phases. The first phase is consideration. So considering a program and you haven't yet made a decision. It's what we call the national position. And then at the end of phase 1, you reach milestone 1, which is ready to make a decision, and your decision will be yes or no. The second phase is the planning. So setting up the regulatory body, doing a lot of the planning elements. And then the third phase is construction. So at the moment we have 4 countries in construction phase in phase 3. There's Belarus, there's the United Arab Emirates, there's Turkey, and there's Bangladesh. So the types of support that we give are the same. So we would go and do an expert mission or a workshop, or we would invite them to a training course. But of course, the way that those activities look in practice are quite different. So if we're looking at a phase 1 country, they haven't made a decision yet. And they're asking, well, our population doesn't know very much about nuclear power, so we want to start talking about it more. How do we do that? What are the things that we can do to start raising awareness about our energy mix? And that's exactly what we would kind of say as an expert team. And I say we, it's not me, it's me plus 2 or 3 experts from different countries. We would say, don't single nuclear out as something special. Talk about your energy mix, your energy needs, your energy future. What matters to the people? That they come home and they can turn their lights on, that their bills are low, that there's, that there's this flexibility of energy generation. So we would talk about it maybe on that level. In phase 2, we would maybe look at their strategy document. By that point, they should have one. Or, for example, they want to open a public information center, and they don't know maybe where to start. So it's really depending on the specific needs and the specific point in the program that a country is in.
And do you also work directly with energy companies, or is it only governments?
Nope. Usually the owner-operator or future owner-operator, if that entity is being set up, is there. So I'm going to Warsaw in a couple months, and I'll be working with PGE there to directly with them, and the government will be there as well. The regulator will not be there. It really depends on what the point of the activity is, but we do work directly with the operators.
So another question that came up a lot in the morning is the time that it usually takes to construct a nuclear or get a project from start to finish. Wouldn't sort of engagement be just adding more time to that process?
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it, or you could look at it as a key to enabling and facilitating that process. We typically look at maybe a 10-year average for a first nuclear power plant, and a 100-year commitment because of the life cycle of a facility. So when you look at it that way, the engagement, I think, is a key element to that. And if you don't do it effectively, while it's no guarantee that your project will succeed, it can be very much hindered if you don't try to do it effectively from the beginning. And we've seen it happen with cancelled programs for a variety of different reasons, but lack of effective engagement being one of them.
So, and then a slightly kind of different question. Based on your experience with some nuclear plants, could you see knowledge around engagement being transferred also to other areas? I'm thinking specifically, for example, around transmission grids and large investments in other areas where we have a lot of sort of public opposition potentially, or it might be difficult to explain why should country A invest in something that benefits country B. Do you think that there's kind of given the long history of your work, that we could learn from that in other areas, and so which ones?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I think lessons learned or lessons identified, sometimes learned is a big word, can be beneficial. Yeah, I mean, looking at the infrastructure issues and how those cross-cut with other issues, other infrastructure issues, including grid, including financing, but other industries as well. I think that it's a difficult industry to be a communicator in. So similarly to the airline industry as well, but with less negative perception, because you don't have to have nuclear power necessarily, but you do kind of need to, to take an airplane. But yeah, I think that we're quite responsible, we as a nuclear community, and how we try to improve our communication, how we try to face the challenges, how do we try to correct misperceptions. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So hopefully some of those lessons could be beneficial to other areas.
Thanks a lot, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks.